We're getting started today on encountering non-Christian religions. Now, this particular lecture is just going to be an overview introduction to religions. Going to cover some of the more basic aspects of just what people mean when they're even talking about religion. What are some of the elements of religion that we're dealing with? Do be aware of the fact that I will be uploading all of these PowerPoints to your course. There should be a section called PowerPoints there in the course. And so don't feel like you have to write down everything on every slide. There's a lot of information in this class. So write down the most important parts. If you need to, go back and reference the PowerPoints. Even copy and paste from them if you need to. I just want to make sure you get the best quality of this that you possibly can. So let's talk a little bit about the most basic aspects of religion. The word religion itself that we use when we discuss these are actually from the Latin word religare. Religare was to tie up or to tie fast. Now that sounds an odd phrase to think of about when we talk about religion, but then you look at some of the related words, the word ligue and the word leg. Ligue is to bind, and leg is to take up or to observe. So when you take it into its root meaning, the idea is of binding oneself to obey the demands of a divine message. So religare religion is this idea of a person choosing to bind themselves, to associate themselves with a particular divine message, and then saying, I will live my life based on the precepts that I find there. In order to understand religion, it's necessary to understand that humankind's tendency to live in the tension between conditioned reality and unconditioned reality. And this is one of the things that distinguish a religion from other aspects of thinking, philosophical thinking and such. And in fact, this is actually a philosophical way of thinking about religion, but we're not in a philosophy class right now, but that's what we're looking at. Conditioned reality. Conditioned reality is the limited or restricted world that we live in day by day. Conditioned reality is where we are right now. It's that moment in time that we can only live at one time and space in any given moment. Our life is wrapped up in this here and now. It's wrapped up in this moment that we're in, this situation that we're facing at the moment. And I can only think about really one thing at a time. See, once again, we're trapped in this thing where we can only live in one time and space. We can only think about one thing at a time, and we forget much of what we learn. And if you don't believe me, then go back and take the test from the classes you took 2 semesters ago and see if you can still answer all the questions. Well, of course you can't, because you've forgotten a portion of what you learned. And we set limits around or about ourselves. We talk about, well, I'm a person who does this and not that. I'm a person that believes this and not that. I can do this and not that. So our conditioned reality is limited and a restricted world. It's our day-to-day life. And it's not a negative thing. It just is what it is. So we live in a conditioned reality. All human beings, and as part of our nature, we live in a conditioned reality. But we also can conceptualize of an unconditioned reality. In our minds, as a matter of fact, we as believers in Christ, we have this understanding, this idea that there is a reality that is bigger than, more than, outside our current reality. And it's called unconditioned reality. It's unlimited, it's unrestricted, and it is considered a divine reality. Whatever the existence and unconditioned reality is equally present at all places and all times. When we speak about our theology of God being omnipresent, that means that he is present at all places at all times. So that's an unconditioned reality thought. All thoughts, all ideas, all concepts can be conceived of and considered at all times. So once again, we speak of God being all-knowing. Omniscient, meaning that he knows all that there is to know, and he knows all of those things at all times. So there's this unlimited knowledge, unlimited wisdom, unlimited mental power that is available at all times. So religion, by its nature, is this interesting situation where we live between, or not really between, we live in, but we try to live with our feet in both worlds. We live with an understanding that we live in conditioned reality, but that there is an unconditioned reality that in some way is above or outside, but we can experience that unconditioned reality. And this concept of conditional and unconditional reality in religions, this is not just Christianity. Almost any, well, matter of fact, if you don't have this concept of conditioned reality and unconditioned reality, it's probably not a religion. It's rare to find anything that would call itself a religion that doesn't have some concept of this. For the Christian, conditioned reality is what? The world. It's the place that we live in right now. It's the realities that we face right now. We're in the world. The unconditioned reality that we believe in is God and eternity, that a being that is outside, above, beyond, and a time and place, or a time and place where time and place don't exist. We won't deal with that too much. But a time and place that is beyond this realm of the world that we live in. For Hindus, we'll talk about this later on, the word Maya. Maya is that unreal reality that we live in right now. And for them, unconditioned reality is Brahman, the universal being that exists all everywhere. For Buddhism, samsara is the conditioned reality. It's the wheel. That's this continual cycle that we can't break out of. For them, unconditioned reality is nirvana, the place of complete release, the place of losing yourself and stop. The place of cessation of being is unconditioned reality. For Taoism, Confucianism, they both kind of have this concept of under heaven. Everything that takes place under heaven, basically like we would say the world, and for them is conditioned reality. But for the Taoists, the Tao is unconditioned reality. It exists, and it's an all-knowing, all-going, it's beyond our normal things. And from Confucianism has a concept of heaven, have under heaven and heaven. But we'll talk about that later as well. Islam has this, what they call the world, the realm of war. And when they say that, they're not saying that we should always be actually at war, but referring to the fact that this is where the battle for the heart, the battle for the mind, the battle for who is going to rule over our lives. That's the battle that takes place. And unconditioned reality is Allah. So you can see that this conditional and unconditional reality are concepts that are part of every major religion, and even most of the minor ones as well. So, religion is also defined by three forms of religious expression. This was actually, this was structured by I'm trying to say it in Latvian, Joachim Wack, he's a sociologist and also anthropologist, and so he kind of developed these ideas that there's three forms of religious expression. There's the theoretical, the practical, and the sociological. These three forms of religious expression, together they form the central experience for those who are practicing a religion. The theoretical aspect of religious expression is doctrine and myth. What is it that a religion says? What is it that what do they say about themselves? What do they teach? There is the practical aspect of religious expression. The practical aspect is what takes place in worship, what kind of rituals take place, meditation, prayer. In other words, what do they do? What does a person who's a participant in this religion do? And then the third aspect of religious expression is the sociological. Leadership, community, how do they organize? How do they interact? Who is a leader? Is it a tight-knit group or a loose-knit group? Do you all belong, or are there insiders and outsiders? All of these things, and the combination of the theoretical, practical, and sociological, those three together form the central experience of a religion. And so when we look at the religions, even though I might not use these three words, most of the religions we're going to look at at least these three aspects. We're going to look at some things that are doctrine. We're going to look at some things that are practice. We're going to look at some things that are social in each one of these religions, as much as it's able to report upon those things. So theoretical is what is taught. What is the fundamental worldview? What is God like? What is the ultimate reality like? Some believe in a God, some believe in an ultimate reality. What is the origin and destiny of the world? Where did the world come from? Where is it headed? What is the origin and destiny of mankind? Where did humankind come from, and where are we headed? Some sort of revelation about our mediation between the ultimate and humankind. How is it that humankind got to know about this ultimate or this God? And so that's the theoretical things. That's the what is taught. The practical, what is done. Well, what is expected of human participants? What is allowed? What is not allowed? How should they live their lives on a day-to-day basis? What are acceptable worship practices? What are acceptable practices outside of what in their day-to-day lives? What's the acceptable behavior that they're supposed to be doing? So the practical has to do with what is done, and then the sociological is how do they organize? How do you organize? Who is a leader? How is this leader chosen? How does the group relate to outsiders? How do they relate to each other? What is orthodoxy? What is the norms that would be within our thing? So you can see these three forms of religious expression. There's a lot of crossover with them, but it's a good way of kind of viewing them so we can understand the theoretical, the practical, and the sociological. So as I said, this will kind of be a foundation for how we're going to view the religions as we go through the lectures. Some of the typical inclusions in religion. What do religions normally have within them? What are the things that you would normally find when you're looking at a religion? Well, first of all, you're going to find some sacred objects of some sort. The sacred objects might be implements that they use to perform rituals, or implements that they use to go through particular rites of passage or whatever else. There's often going to be a temple or a church or a meeting facility. They might have a holy mountain, a holy rock, a holy river, a holy tree, a book, a symbol. Every religion has some sort of sacred objects. Now, evangelical and Pentecostal Christians tend to think of ourselves as not having a lot of these, and we don't have as many as most do, but we still have our things that we consider to be holy. The truth is, I don't know that we necessarily have sacred objects so much as now we have sacred practices. I've actually written a paper concerning the modern construct of worship and how worship now has taken on a special place. In fact, that it's almost like a holy thing, that somehow we are creating the presence of God or calling forth the presence of God in worship, and how that's kind of an extra biblical concept, but it's the same kind of thing. These special little cups that they have, or the special little bell that they ring, or the special temple, these are supposed to be sacred in some way to call forth the presence of their deity, and because it's a sacred object. Typically, religions include sacred persons of some sort. It can be a priest in Catholicism or Orthodoxy. There can be a shaman, a medicine man. Priests in Hinduism or Buddhism. Could be a pastor. But there's some aspect of a sacred person, a person that is more in contact with that supernatural being than others are. And so that's typical in most religions. Some of the other inclusions in religion is there's typically some idea of interpreting natural events. Now, this widely varies, but there's the idea of interpreting, well, if there's rain, what does that mean? Is a God or a being speaking to us? If there's no rain, are we out of balance with nature? A volcanic eruption, is that judgment? Is that the cleansing of promise? A storm, an eclipse, a moon cycle, a season. Most religions have some interpretations of these natural events that work through the worldview and the teachings that they have. Most religions have beliefs or creeds. The former religions will have doctrines and holy writings. Most religions have something that they can say, here is it may be 16 fundamental truths, or it may be 1,600 pages of the repetitious writings of an ancient priest or guru. But they have something that's formal that they can say, here are our holy writings. The more informal religions, the animistic religions, often have stories and myths and traditions with morals. Often these are passed down orally, not necessarily in writing, and there's no official collection of those. But there are beliefs and there are creeds, and if even if it's not in writing, they can tell you, no, we believe this, we don't believe that. And so now they may not say that in the way that we do as Americans, as Westerners. We tend to be very, very clear and crisp, and we put things in little squares. If you were talking to a person in the animistic religion, they would not be able to give you a little square. They would tell you a story, and the telling of that story, they would that story would explain their beliefs, not just here is ABC 1 2 3. We are ABC 1 2 3 people. Most of the people of the world are not. Most of the people of the world are story people, and so, but even so, there are beliefs and creeds. There are always beliefs about the God, or about the ultimate being, the ultimate force or energy, whatever that is there. And there's normally three ways of arriving at some level of truth related to that God. The three ways, and it's not really, and once again, these are very generalized. If you've read something that says this is not the way to look at it, that's fine. This is not the way to look at it. This is super simplified. But there's this ways of arriving at truth. There's the causative conceptual. That's Western style thinking typically, where we have postulational, theoretical thinking. We work from what can be observed and we work backwards. I mean, some of the teleological argument for the existence of God, okay, that is very much a Western. This exists, and therefore since this exists, it must have a cause, and since that cause is shown to be this, this, and this, and this, we can see this about the existence of God. That's one way of arriving at truth. Even our proof of the resurrection. There is a religion called Christianity, and that religion called Christianity came into being because this group of men went out and taught about this Jesus, and that group of men would not have taught about a Jesus who had just died. They would not have surrendered their lives for a lie, and therefore Christianity is true. Well, that's a causative, conceptual way of reasoning. I don't think it's wrong. It's the way my brain operates too, but just be aware it's not the only way that people's brains operate. There's the intuitive, more of an Eastern motif, Buddhist, Hindu, and other religions such as that. Knowledge that emanates from inner experience and vision. The intuitive is being able to get into a state of mind where truth just arrives in your mind. And so that is a way that people arrive at truth. The concrete relational, also called imaginative form of reasoning, and that's life and reality are seen pictorially or in the form of story in terms of active emotional relationships present in the concrete situation. So it's not about this exists, therefore that, and that. This exists, and what does it mean? And how does that relate to the story of us and the story of mankind, the story of our village? And so that's a form of reasoning that they arrive at what they consider to be truth. Some of the general beliefs about deity, divine, ultimate, there's always the similar things about this. The idea that that whatever it is superhuman. It's above and outside human limitations. It's invisible. In other words, usually this being or this either being or force or whatever cannot be experienced just with normal human senses, except in the very specific situations and circumstances. It's sovereign, and to some degree, this divine or ultimate rules over human welfare and destiny. And at the same time, it's responsive, meaning in some way humans can influence this divine or ultimate through religious acts. And so even though it rules over, he also is responsive, and it causes responses that humans can experience emotions, awe, trust, obedience, submission in the presence of this divine and ultimate. So, as I said, we're talking about religion as a whole, and you can see that in almost every religious, there is these elements as how they define the divine or the ultimate, the God of their religion. And so these are just once again, just general principles about religion. Looking just real quickly at the periods of religious history, and we'll talk a little bit more about this later on. Now, this is based on the theory of the evolution of religions. And another video I'm going to mention that I don't necessarily fully accept this concept of the evolution of religions, and I'll explain why in another video. But this is just a way of kind of looking at how religions, the different religions and different levels of religions formed. First of all, there was hunting and gathering religions. That's based on the fact that earliest human society were hunter-gatherers. And that meant they traveled from place to place and they were dependent on what they could find. Well, their spiritual focus was on a high God, a spirit that was above the world, who sustained and provided for it. And so they looked at the sky god, and they looked into the world of animals, and they looked into the power of the shaman. This was the ecstatic individual who was able to be a custodian of spiritual power. In other words, they had this sky god and this world of animals and spirits, and he could, by contacting this sky god and this world of spirits and animals, able to tell them where to go next and where to go hunt and where to go gather, and he would have visions and things like that. That was kind of their focus and their worship. Moving on from that to agricultural religion. The next phase of human development was when they moved from hunting and gathering to planting fields. And at that point, the focus of the religion shifted from the forest to the planted field. The spiritual focus became more of the earth goddess, and sacrifices to the powers that controlled fertility, to the fertility of plants, the fertility of animals, and offering blood sacrifices or offering sacrifices of some of their harvest or whatever else to appease the spirits so that their next harvest would be plentiful and stuff. And spiritual life began tied to the cycle of seasons. They had the spring planting rites, the autumn harvest festivals, all type of actions and behaviors to appease these spirits or gods or goddesses that were going to bring them harvest. And then just before the development of what we would call the major religions of our day, there was the ancient empire religions. During that time period, Egypt, India, China, Middle East all had powerful empires. And they developed out of the motifs of agricultural religion. But there was this idea that the earth was a goddess that brought forth life and to whom the dying return. And in some way, the kings or the emperors were seen as tied to this earth goddess, sometimes even considered to be married to or in relationship with this earth goddess. Therefore, the king was a divine agent. And he was able, through his practices and his priests and all these type of things, he was able to help bring forth fertility and prosperity. And so it's interesting that when you look back, even in the Old Testament times, about when different people groups conquered another people group, the idea that their people group's God was bigger than their people group's God because their king was able to beat their king. And so there was this idea, okay, well, you must have a higher God because your higher God beat our lower God. And our king was tied to this God and you're tied to that God. And this is when polytheism really developed. And it developed to address the ever-increasing specializations. At one time, the only gods and goddesses you had to worry about was the ones that provided crops or provided animals for food. Well, now you had metal workers. Well, who do the metal workers pray to? Who do they offer to? Because they're not messing with that. The stone workers, the weaving workers, who do they worship? What is the God that blesses their particular field? And so as these increasing specializations grew, there began to be more and more gods and goddesses that would provide blessing or provision or help, or the goddess of the loom, the god of this of metal and of metal work. And you can see actually by the time we get to the Roman gods and Greek gods that you had the god of metal, the god of fire, the god of stone, the god of wheat. All of these gods and goddesses became into existence during that time. And it was, once again, based on this theory of evolution of religions, it was out of this platform that the major religions arose, as certain gods kind of took precedence. As I said, don't necessarily agree with that interpretation. It is the interpretation that our textbook uses, but we'll talk about later on how this might fit. So we've covered a lot of ground. Between reading your textbook and this video, you should have a good control over this particular subject matter. Feel free to reread it. Feel free to download the PowerPoints, and we'll move forward with the next video, talking a little bit about animism.